There are some, though, that I think are some entrepreneurs who are just taking a radical new view towards what is a farm, for instance. Irving
Okay.
Bain, who has a company called Bowery, has decided that he can grow food vertically in large warehouses. In fact, his
Mm.
first ones were designed by the designer of Amazon fulfillment centers. So you now, instead of having a horizontal farm, you have one that's vertical. And instead of focused on the entire field of spraying it with whatever, you have robots that are focusing on individualized plants. Instead of having soil, it's done hydroponically or agroponically. So you have some of these entrepreneurs who are sort of stepping back and thinking, well, maybe we can totally rethink the farm and dramatically reduce the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are required, dramatically reduce the need for water, and make available 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year, the availability of fresh and organic produce in urban centers that are providing employment to areas that have been abandoned in the past. So there's these people that are both empowering the farmers, but there's also a few who are stepping outside the box and thinking, let's totally rethink the farm.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of human ingenuity, clever, inventive, and original thinking. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Richard Munson, author and clean energy advocate. He's joining us today to talk about Tech to Table, 25 Innovators Reimagining Food, an upcoming book that documents the entrepreneurial creativity now sweeping through our food and farming space. Munson has worked on clean energy and environmental issues for nonprofits in the private sector and on Capitol Hill. He most recently was Senior Director of the Environmental Defense Fund, where he advanced smart power in the Midwest. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Dick, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the invitation.
So we've never met before. Maybe you can tell us a little about you. I know you've got a long history in clean energy and environmental issues.
I do, which is why I guess I'm interested in innovation. I have worked a lot of my life trying to advance policies that would encourage investment in clean energy development. I've also, helped launch a clean energy startup. And on my writing side, my non-day job side, my most recent book before the one called Tech to Table was a biography of Nikola Tesla, the great inventor who gave us electric motors, robots, remote controls. So innovators have long been fascinating to me because I guess I'm of the opinion that they offer perhaps our best ability to tackle the environmental challenges that we're currently facing.
Well, it's amazing how, when you can really go down a rabbit hole with inventors because the way they think, the way they see the world, it's just different than the average person, I would say.
Well, that's very true. And why I focused on agriculture, which I hadn't really done that much on before because I've been mostly on the environmental, clean energy side. But, when you look at where the largest industry is in the entire world, it is agriculture at $15 trillion.
Right.
It's also, when you think about food and how we farm, they're at the core of so many of our most challenging issues, be that immigration, equity, environmental quality, what have you. And I think for your concern about human ingenuity, it's also the sector that is the least digitalized, some would say the least modernized, economic sector that we face, which obviously presents challenges, but it also presents opportunities for innovators to do better. And I guess I spent the last couple of years searching around and getting to interview a whole bunch of, creative, diverse, driven, entrepreneurs. As you well know, they're a diverse but energetic and entertaining lot. And they're committed to seeing new ways to farm and more options for food.
Well, and it does seem, something that is ripe to be innovative. I mean, for hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of years, we've done it pretty much the same way. Yes, we've automated certain processes, but
Yes.
But past that, nothing seems to have changed other than the fact we've gone from few people on Earth to 8 billion.
Well, that is a significant factor. But you're right. I mean, farming has been very conventional, and for good reasons. I mean, a farmer has one shot each year to do it right and be lucky at the same time, because the luck regarding market prices and weather conditions will impact whether he or she make any money that year. And so they've been somewhat reluctant to change. But I think because we're facing this dramatic confluence of technologies economy-wide, there opens up new opportunities to bring those new and vibrant technologies to the agricultural sector.
So when you were researching and writing your new book, Tech to Table, were you working equally with the inventors or the innovators and those who are farming, just to understand the application? Or
yeah, I certainly tried. And on the farming side, I mean, there's a real split, as you might imagine, of people who think that they know the way to do it because they've been doing it the same way their fathers and grandfathers have done as well. And that's perfectly understandable. There's others, however, who are seeing that their sons and daughters are not inclined to stay on the farm because it's hard work. And it's also not as invigorating or digitalized or modernized or whatever term you want to use it. And so these innovators offer a way for some farmers, at least their perspective is, to keep their kids on the farm, give them more opportunities, increase rural revitalization. So there's this split between, trying to do things the old way and seeing that there are, in fact, potential real benefits by adapting to the new confluence of technologies.
Yeah, and when you say that, and we go back to your earlier point of it, really is the single largest and maybe the most important industry on Earth. And yet fewer and fewer people are being employed or as you say, want to work in that industry the way it is today or the way it traditionally has, because of how hard it is, how challenging it is. So it seems that it's an industry that absolutely needs to change.
Oh, totally. And again, because Eric Schmidt, who used to be the head of Google, noted that we are living in unique times where we face this confluence of technologies. He said, sort of three different factors. One are the sensors that are providing just enormous quantities of information that we didn't have before. And two would be the computing power to process that new data in innovative ways that give us insights. And then the third would be robotics, of having machines do things that have been labor intensive and drudgery focused for such a long period of time. Bringing that confluence of technologies to the agricultural sector opens up enormous opportunities. And I guess the thing that surprised me as I started doing my research is just the amount of and speed of change in this industry is just phenomenal. I mean, ag tech startups have been growing at about 80% a year over the last decade. That's an enormous number. There was about $30 billion of private sector investment in new, ag tech startups last year, and that will be far surpassed this upcoming year. So you have not only a bunch of entrepreneurs who think that they, know the better way to life, if you will, but there's also a growing number of investors who see that this is a place to make money. And that change is, I think, delivering us opportunities for economic advancement on the farm, as well as more options when it comes to our plates.
Well, and it seems, as you describe those 3 points as well about what's changing or what's going on, I think that something that may have been not an art, but I think that understanding the soil, the environment, the seasons, I think that
there are some, though, that I think are some entrepreneurs who are just taking a radical new view towards what is a farm. For instance, Irving Bain, who has a company called Bowery, has decided that he can grow food vertically in large warehouses. In fact, his first ones were designed by the designer of Amazon fulfillment centers. So you now, instead of having a horizontal farm, you have one that's vertical. And instead of, focused on the entire field of spraying it with whatever, you have robots that are focusing on individualized plants. Instead of having soil, it's done hydroponically or agroponically. So you have some of these entrepreneurs who are sort of stepping back and thinking, well, maybe we can totally rethink the farm and dramatically reduce the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are required dramatically. And those people are pretty interesting too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, let me read this to make sure I get it right, because it said you ran into, or you interviewed idealistic, sometimes aggressive, and ambitious to rethink the food system. That to me is phenomenal, because again, what I love about it is with everything, you start with the baby steps, and then yes, you have those people who come in to rethink. So you tell us a little bit more about some of these aggressive, ambitious people, because it's fascinating.
Well, take, for example, a company called FarmWise. They're looking at the problem associated with weeds. Weeds are horrible for farmers. I mean, they suck up, nutrients, suck up water. They strangle, some plants. So the current way of going about doing it, either we send a lot of, farm workers into the field and try and, with backbreaking labor, pluck these babies out, or, we spray the entire field with doses and doses of, poisonous herbicides.
Right.
They looked at the fact that robotics are changing dramatically, and so have developed autonomous machines that they send off into the field. They look like big orange Zambonis, but with amazingly sophisticated technology, because the company has taken thousands and thousands of pictures of weeds and plants at various stages of development at various times of the year, through various lighting conditions. So as they go through the field, they're able to identify a tiny little sprout that will end up being broccoli or some other produce, right, versus something that will become pigweed or other invasive, weed. And then they very quite quickly, their pictures are more sophisticated than the facial recognition that's done by Facebook or Google. And with artificial intelligence are able to process what will be a weed and what will be produce. And then they come in and pluck out, the weed. That blows my mind that they can do that without, having to send fields, workers into these fields and, do backbreaking work and avoid, herbicides. They, through robots, have a way to change the way that we've been thinking about how to deal with one of the farmers' biggest problems.
Oh, that is pretty incredible. And I mean, as you talk about it, the benefits to the workers, to the farmers, to the planet, I mean, they just seem to fall off the page with opportunity.
There are, and what better than anybody, how entrepreneurs work. They are an odd lot who think that they know better, and they sort of have to be unbelievably confident people to be able to raise the money, market their products, etc. So you see people from all sorts of different walks of life suddenly think that they've got a better idea, and they're willing to promote it both to customers, such as farmers, but also to investors who will give them their own money, which is a big risk, to think that they're going to make a profit doing something different. Yeah. I mean, take Uma Valete. He came to the United States from India on a cardiology fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. and he was dealing with trying to figure out how to have stem cells help repair, heart tissue, muscle tissue that had been damaged by heart attacks. He had also, though, been, concerned about, fecal contamination of animals' meats. He'd been concerned about, the slaughter of animals and concerned about the herbicides and everything else to grow the feed for them. And he suddenly had this, thought, what I'm doing with stem cells, I could do to basically make animal muscles. And which is essentially the same as meat. And he said, he had this great quote, he said, if I stayed being a cardiologist, I could probably help several hundred, if not 1,000 people over my lifetime. But if indeed I make this change, if I am this entrepreneur with this new product, I can, save or change the life of hundreds of thousands of humans, let alone billions of animals. And so I think it's that mindset. What he does is take a small sample, from an animal of some stem cells, just, plucks them out and grows them in what look like, they're referred to as bioreactors, but they're essentially fermentation plants that look like the tanks that are used to brew, beer. And as they grow, you suddenly have these cell-based meats that have the potential for, getting rid of all of the ingredients that we use as far as herbicides and water and antibiotics and others to provide meat in our current fashion, but now do it in a modern way. Now, obviously, he's got a lot of things to overcome. There are certain people that are going to say, oh, yuck. Why do I want to eat cell cultured meat? At the same time, he comes back and he says, because it tastes better. It would be what his opportunity is. And the way we currently produce meat is also downright yucky in itself, he would argue. So I think it's just the fascination of this human ingenuity and the entrepreneurial spirit that is driving new opportunities for both farmers and eaters.
Yeah, and you talk about the entrepreneurial spirit, and there's a couple of words that I talk to quite a bit. One is passion, which, again, just falls off the page when you are talking about the people that you have written about and their stories. The other is audacity, and I think that's what you're speaking to a lot. I mean, yeah. The reality is that when we start our businesses, and I was never a cardiologist in training. I could never have done what some of these individuals you describe have done or achieved, and it's phenomenal. But regardless, when we start something, people are always telling us why it can't work, why you shouldn't do it, why you should stick to the job, all good arguments. You have a mortgage, you have kids, but you know what? Sometimes you just have to look at yourself and say, you know what? I think I have a great idea. I think in the stories that you're telling, it can change an industry. It can change millions or billions of people's lives. And I think it's wonderful to hear about people who've just jumped off the deep end and are making these things happen, making these changes happen, because it will impact, it'll impact humanity, and frankly, it'll impact animals in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have numerous challenges, as you note. I mean, there will be people tell you you just can't do this. Right. You do have to raise money. You have to come up with a product that actually works. It's not easy. Plus, you also face opposition from the status quo. And big ag is referred to as big for good reason. They are huge, and they can exert their muscle power. You can use that term. And so it does take, audacity, as you note, to think that you can do this better. But I think across the board, there were these individuals. One of the questions that I get all the time is from folks wondering if all these entrepreneurs are simply trying to develop a new idea so they can sell it to big ag. And there will be some that want to do that because, they'll make a whole bunch of money and that's fine. That's sort of the way our system works. But I was surprised by the number of the entrepreneurs who simply said, nope, I've got a better idea and I'm going to beat these guys because they're slow moving oligopolies and I can move faster and I've got a better product than they do. So that it's that confidence, it's that audacity that, makes them sometimes obnoxious, but it's sort of what's needed to be able to move the needle, to make change, to overcome the opposition from doing just things the conventional way.
Yeah. Well, going back to one of your earlier books, as you had mentioned, Nikola Tesla, I mean, could you imagine radio robots, remote control, what he must have heard when he first said, no, I've got something even better.
Well, I mean, Nikola Tesla is a good example. I mean, he had amazing discoveries that, are sort of the foundations of our modern economy. He also made a bunch of mistakes. I mean, he thought that airplanes would be too heavy to soar. He thought splitting an atom wouldn't produce any heat, but I think the key thing here is, it's a weird term, but his batting average was extraordinary. And so it's not like every, entrepreneur who has a great idea is going to be right all the time. But the question is, are they going to be right enough of the time that they move the needle, they improve our living conditions, and from their perspective, make money at the same time?
Yeah, and you know what? You just said something that's so critical for innovators, whether they're entrepreneurs or in companies, the batting average. Boy, there's so much talk, and I get to work with so many, corporate teams, and I'll say we only succeeded 3 out of 10 times, we failed 7. I said, well, 3 out of 10, you go to the Hall of Fame. So in baseball, so I think it's time to shift our focus and how we look at success and failure. So I love that point very much.
Well, it happens with every single inventor. Even, Thomas Edison, who, was a competitor to Nikola Tesla. I mean, he did crazy things. I mean, he was developing telephones to talk to the dead, for heaven's sakes. I mean, and so, in part, not all of the entrepreneurs that I was interviewing are, anywhere like Nikola Tesla or, Thomas Edison. I'm not suggesting that at all, but along the pendulum of great inventors and people, entrepreneurs, innovators, who are not necessarily inventing, but they're making real an invention. They're bringing it to the market. Those are real skills that, you're going to have some setbacks along the way. But the aggressive ones are going to make us all sort of step back and think, I wish I had thought of that. Or this really does make life better for us.
Could you imagine pitching, selling books online, being in that pitch meeting? And that was just months after Netscape and the viable internet, we can call it, came about. So, Dick, just to take a step back to agriculture and some of the stories, I think one of the things that struck me as you were describing it, it's a question, is the infrastructure ready? Meaning, broadband in farming communities, technology. I mean, because the technology, and I'm sure the orange Zamboni, as you describe it, looking for weeds and rustling through the dirt, etc. Do we have that in small communities and farming communities to support it? And will this actually, if we don't, will this actually hasten that, the bringing of broadband technology to all of our smaller communities?
One thing about entrepreneurs I found, when it comes to politics, most of them are not really wild about government assistance. They sort of think government gets in the way, and their general preference is to keep them out of my business and just let me compete. In fact, they would, say, get rid of all the subsidies that are going to the conventional way and, let, new blooms have an opportunity. That said, I think across the board, the one thing that people point to is the lack of broadband infrastructure in rural communities that is so necessary to make some of these, advances of technologies, digitalized technologies and sensing and computing power requires, the government assistance to be able, as we did with electricity, and Tesla and Edison's efforts to bring them not just to urban centers, but to rural communities as well. And the most recent infrastructure bill includes a whole lot of money for doing that very thing. But I think that is the one thing that I would say in entrepreneurs would say that's something that government could do that would be helpful. There's a whole lot of things they don't want, but that one of bringing broadband infrastructure is critical.
Absolutely. Well, so as our time starts to move to a close together today, I wanted to bring up one last thing. It was a blog you wrote, Make Chicago the Center of Agricultural Innovation. Now, Chicago, as I understand it, was the center or one of the centers 100 years ago. Why are you looking at it today as so important or potentially so important?
Well, I'm probably a bit spoiled. I live in Chicago at the moment, so I do have that sort of perspective. But yes, I mean,
live
Chicago,
in your sister city. I live in Toronto, which our architecture and waterfront are same
Aren't
architecture.
Anyway. Well, Chicago, I mean, think about Sinclair Lewis and his, criticism of the slaughterhouses. But in one regard, slaughterhouses were, a technological miracle. As far as the processing and speed and efficiency that was, able, Chicago set up the commodities exchanges that allowed, the reduction of risk, for farmers as they think about marketing their products. They did canning first in Chicago. So it has a history of thinking about being in part of the breadbasket, if you will. And I think you're beginning to see a variety of entrepreneurs within Chicago of focusing on food and farm innovation. There's one old slaughterhouse that got converted into a research and development center for people that are making algae and mycelia, which is essentially mushrooms, those sort of things to make meat or feed alternatives to our current process. Plus, Chicago is an investing center. And there are several venture capital firms here in Chicago, the heart of the farm belt, if you will, that are thinking about ways of making money by investing in some of these new technologies. So it strikes me as though it's a golden opportunity for this city, to attract investment and entrepreneurs. And they are making progress in doing it. And I think all I did through that blog was try and say, be more public about it, because this is a real growth opportunity for the city.
No, sounds great. This is a great point. And Dick Munson, it was a pleasure speaking to you today. Tech to Table, your new book, your latest book. Thank you for sharing the stories and good luck with it.
Well, thank you. Again, I appreciate the invitation. You take care.
Take care. Bye.